Leaders become great not because of their power, but because of their ability to empower others. Today, we have a special guest on our show. In fact, she is a leader in the field of public service. She's a state representative for Michigan's 41st House District and is the first ever Indian American to hold office in Michigan Legislature. She strives to bring positive change and policy reform in topics related to education and the environment. And today, in this show, she's going to be talking about her journey from the start and the several challenges that she had faced along the way, and some advice that she has for people pursuing public service and leadership in general. Let's welcome our guest, Representative Padma Kuppa. The general idea of kind of why I wanted to do this podcast is I just wanted to interview a lot of people with inspiring stories and experiences, and kind of people who achieved a lot of things, and they can possibly give advice to young people about leadership, public service, and things like that. And then I thought you were a great person to ask advice about those things. And so why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
So, hi, this is Padma Kuppa. I'm the state representative for Michigan's 41st House District. 41st District encompasses two cities in Michigan, in southeastern Michigan, Troy and Clawson. I've lived in Troy for over 20 years and fell in love with Michigan when I moved here with my two young children and my husband to be an engineer in the auto industry. Both of us are engineers and immigrants from India. So I never really got involved. I never really thought that my career was going to be as an elected official in public service, in political office. I actually loved math when I was growing up. And when I was growing up in public schools, I didn't know what my career was going to be. What I did know is that my interest in engineering and science-related professions was because of my parents, their encouragement that I take on a career that would be financially good and sustainable so that I could, live a good life, right? Like as an immigrant. But then my parents, when they were done with their higher education, they were immigrants to this country in 69, 70. My father came for postdoctoral work and for graduate work, and my mother got her PhD here. After they did that, they decided they wanted to go back to their country. They were born in India, as was I, but I had grown up here. So you can imagine, as a 15-year-old, I didn't want to go back. And going back, I did not feel like I fit in. But I knew that I wanted to come back, and the opportunity to do engineering was the one that I chose. I didn't like the sight of blood, so but I always knew that my parents went back to India because they wanted to help the community. They got their education here and they wanted to help others. They felt that having studied here, they could offer more to their fellow Bharatiya people. And so I knew that I didn't fit in, but I always knew that I needed to help others. That was something that I always knew. And so even though I was an engineer, it didn't stop me from volunteering. To me, that's really the ultimate way that you can serve society, whatever your career is, because that's going to pay your daily wages and put a roof over your head and pay for your life, but daily living expenses. But you're also going to have to give back to the community. And so while I was working and raising my kids, I volunteered. I volunteered in the temple. I volunteered in their schools, in the PTA, and then I eventually volunteered in the city because I understood that all politics is local. In fact, when I was volunteering in many of these places, people would tell me, "Oh, Padma, you should run for something." It's like, "Oh no, politics isn't for me. I don't like politics." And it's very divisive. So anyway, so that was sort of the encouragement I got from a lot of people that made me realize that maybe I should run. Yeah.
That was a great introduction. Lots of cool stuff about yourself. And this is kind of like what I wanted to start off with the first question. So as you're talking about how you kind of got into politics, what were kind of the biggest challenges through the course of the journey of entering into politics, or just like growing up being a first generation American back in like the 70s and 80s? And how were you able to overcome them?
So sure. So when somebody told me I should run for office and I hesitated, I didn't like politics because it's so polarizing, and it's so polarizing right now. So I find that to be very difficult. But also what was very difficult is learning how to run for office and what is involved in running for office. And so I took a class. There's an organization locally here, and the local organization is called Michigan United, and they worked with Sierra Club to provide, over the course of 3 weekends, to provide training. And as I took that training, I realized, you know what? All this volunteering I did, it really helped me, because it's just about organizing people and getting them to commit to a cause. I volunteered on many different causes over the years, not just the city, the temple, and the schools, but also on issues that I cared about. I volunteered on, actually, when my son was very young, I remember, my kids were very young, he must have been 6. We went to stand at the corner of two major intersection here in Troy, because it was about bringing the troops home and ending the war in Iraq. You know, we spend so much more money on war than we do on education. And so again, it all tied back to, why is a society that's civilized spending so much money on war? Because if you invest in education, your economy grows, people are healthier, happier, and more successful. The whole society is lifted. Whereas if you create war all over the world, you're not doing the right thing. And our troops are suffering. Many of them come home with PTSD. They've given so much of their time. And so I did all of that. And then I realized that I could apply that to my my political campaign, and that I had so many friends, right? So many friends, not only did they come to volunteer with me, but all these people that knew me, who knew what kind of person I was, they also came and gave me money, because that's the other thing that you need to do, is you need to reach out to voters and you need to reach out to donors. Now, why is money such an integral part of politics? Money is an integral part of politics because you send mailers to people, you maintain data. Data costs money. You maintain a mailbox, you put a lawn sign, you do TV and radio advertising, you do print advertising. And then sometimes you feed your volunteers, you do fundraisers. And when you're fortunate, you're able to have lots of people help. Now, one of the beautiful things of my campaign is that I had hundreds of donors, because I knew people from all these years of 20 years of volunteering in the community had built up like a lot of friends. And so that was one of the good things that happened for me. So it was, but I think that that's really important, is to know that you need to know how a campaign is run. And you also need to be ready to ask people for money. And I think also, as an Indian immigrant, you know, you're supposed to be, as any kind of immigrant, we're taught to be self-sufficient, not ask for a handout. But I think I've gone through enough training on this also, that I'm not asking money for me or asking for a handout. What I'm asking for is support a kind of government that you also believe in. We share these values, that everybody should have access to clean drinking water, that we should make good decisions about children's education, that we should make good decisions about climate change based in science, that we should make good decisions about what we do to respond to COVID. And so I think that that's the way that I present when I ask for money. And so those are some of the difficulties. Also, knocking doors. I actually ended up quitting my job in 2018 when I ran, because I couldn't manage all the things I had to do and reach out to all the people I needed to do. Now, I'll tell you, I ran in a district that had never been held by an immigrant, by a woman of color, because there was one woman that had held the seat. And when I called her for her support, she said, "Don't worry, I'm voting for you." I didn't even have to go further than that, because she knew of me. And then the other thing was that I was the first Democrat to run for this seat. Mm-hmm. And it was very largely a Republican district. And so I think it was really important that I had all this the support from within the party, as well as the Democratic Party, who, took me under their wing, but also from a lot of local representatives that I knew because I'd interacted with them. So there's a man who ran for Congress, but he was a state representative. His name is Tim Grimel. And another one named Andy Meisner. He's running for county executive right now in the state of Michigan. And he also came and helped me as I, laid out the campaign and gave me advice both on who to seek endorsements from and, just all the different players in the political arena, because that's something that, if you're not plugged into it, right? Like I don't know what kind of field you and your sister go into, but like I talked to my son who's going into philosophy, right, as a field, or my daughter who's going into medicine as a field. My husband and I are engineers. We don't know anything about those fields and what potentially they can do in those fields. And so fortunately I know a lot of doctors, so I can kind of tell her, why don't you talk to that uncle or this auntie? But it's not always that way. And so politics is an arena where I would love to see more young people understand how it works. More people, not just young people, but all people. And so that's one of the things that I've been trying to do as far as running for office. And once I became a legislator, I realized the hardest thing is because I won by such a narrow margin, I needed to make sure that the people who didn't vote for me, who voted for my opponent, even though he wasn't as good a candidate, that they would trust me and that they would also want to vote for me in the next election. And so I went out asking people door to door, asking them, what are the concerns that you have? This is what I'm working on in the legislature. Can you help me, advise me on what I can do? And so, so I think it's really important that we get plugged in at the local level, and that will help us as we become involved in elections and campaigns in the political arena overall.
That makes sense. One more question that I had was, this is something that a lot of people kind of, are you familiar with the TV show House of Cards?
I am not.
You're not?
But
okay.
I saw your question, so.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So what is your opinion on politics, just having cutthroat competition, kind of like in that show? And, is real life politics really like that? Or what is your experience?
So here's what I'll say. I have not watched the show. I've seen a few episodes of West Wing. I think that's about it. I will say that politics is competitive. And it's also a dichotomy, right? And it's a paradox in many ways, because on the one hand, you have to have confidence to go to somebody's door and say, I want to be your representative, or pick up the phone and ask somebody for money, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you also have to have empathy. You have to be willing to listen, because I can say I'm supporting schools, but if I go to somebody's house and that person is 70 years old and they don't have kids in the district and they're not raising children at this point, I don't know if they care about education. Maybe they care about prescription drugs. Maybe they care about their pension plan. Maybe they're a retired teacher and, some of the people in the legislature are saying, let's take away your pension and taxing you on your pension. So these are the things I think are important, is the ability to stand strong for something and then also to listen. I think that's harder for me. And then the partisan politics. It's definitely partisan in this current year, where the attitude against our Governor Whitmer, from people in the community as well as my Republican colleagues, has been very harsh. And just, if you are a person of faith, and I really consider myself, you bear a certain responsibility to be civil when you talk about someone else. You listen, even if it's somebody who's within your party or somebody outside your party. You have to be willing to listen. And then the thing that I find the hardest is what a large role money plays in politics, especially on the Republican side. They have big donors. On the Democratic side, I would say there are donors who also can give. So I have individual donors who can give me $1,050 for my race. That's not a lot, really, in the whole scheme of things. But I can get $10,000 from Political Action Committee. that political action committee can give any state representative $10,000. Now, what happens is I go out and solicit money from people. I get about 1,300 donations is what I've gotten so far this cycle. And that means that, my average donation, and I raised about $170,000, right? I raised $170,000, 1,300. So that's not a large number. Whereas if you are getting your donations from political action committees, one donation is $10,000. How many of them? You need 15, 20 donors to get $170,000, right? Mm-hmm. You're beholden to them. Whereas when I get 1,300 donors, I have a wide range of opinions. So I have to balance and juggle all those different issues that people care about and all those. And so I think when they have more money like that they get from bigger donors, like the DeVos family, like the Koch brothers, and those are individuals. Whereas the $10,000 I got from the Michigan Education Association in 2018, or I got from the League of Conservation Voters. These are organizations that have members who are not wealthy people. They're all contributing. In fact, MEA, Michigan Education Association, is like any member organization, state organization of the National Education Association, which is really based on teachers wanting elected officials to advocate so that they can do a good job. They want people who will look out so that they can teach students well. Similarly, I have the American Federation of Teachers, AFT. I have union organizations. Several of them have endorsed me and will give me money. That's, I think, one of the differences is there's a lot of unions that protect people that want me to represent them and protect workers, right? Because government is about people and helping people. And so I appreciate the support I get from the unions. But I know that there have been outsized influence of donors and in the whole political process. If people put more money in, they have more sway, right? And so I think that's one of the things that I find very challenging. And that is cutthroat. Like, who raises the most money and who's going to be, in charge, and who's going to. So I've been trying to balance who I ask for money with, like, why I'm asking for the money, so people understand that I may not always vote exactly the way you want. In fact, we had a non-binding resolution on an issue around a tunnel that goes through the Mackinac Straits. You know that Michigan is called the Great Lakes State. Mm-hmm. And so the group that wanted us to vote one way on the resolution was a labor group, a few labor groups. The environmental groups were all against the resolution. And I ended up voting. It was a non-binding resolution. It doesn't have any real policy or legislative laws that are enacted. But I voted against the resolution because the resolution was about building a tunnel, allowing Enbridge, that runs the Line 5 pipeline currently, for allowing them to build a tunnel under so that they could keep the pipeline going. Now, if that tunnel broke or the pipeline cracks and there's spillage, that could destroy our Great Lakes. That would destroy a $25 billion tourism industry, let alone the environment, right? So there's so many impacts. Mm-hmm. And the thing was, the resolution was non-binding, but I know that a lot of the labor groups were concerned because there are potentially jobs from building that tunnel through the Great Lakes. But there's no guarantee. The resolution is not binding. Nobody's making the labor groups any promises. So I weighed the options, whether I vote yes or vote no. And I called the labor groups and I told them I voted no on the resolution because I want to protect the environment. But when the opportunity comes and there's something binding and then there's opportunity for jobs, let's look at good legislation that will protect the environment, protect the Great Lakes, and also provide for jobs. So, yeah, so some of these, like trying to figure out what's the right way to vote can be quite challenging.
Mm-hmm. So the next question I had for you was, just your experience with what you were saying, interfaith work, and kind of like what you learned from that experience, and also just like general advice for what people in like the Indian community can do to kind of maintain peaceful relations, peaceful race relations, understand like other cultures and races like better. And wanted to know your advice or experience with that.
So first thing I would say is it's always good to be in our own community and talk to people in Telugu, because you and I are both Telugu. Even though our names are Kuppa, we're not related, although your father and I went to the same college. So I like the idea of being close to people who have an affinity. So I'm an engineer. I like hanging out with engineers. I would go, I like people who speak Telugu. Like that's normal, right? Like wanting to speak with and hang out with people who share common ground. But I think the goal for me has always been to find people who are different and find our common ground.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you build a more cohesive society. And so I think that's really important. I would say that's probably one of the first things you can do. Whether or not you get involved in politics, make sure you vote and make sure that you volunteer in some capacity on an issue that you care about. And make friends with people who are probably culturally different, but who share your values. So let's say you care about the environment. Pick that as your issue. Go find an organization. Let's say you care about immigrant rights. Go find an organization. Because right now, one of the things that I've noticed is that we talk about refugees and putting children in cages. And this is also critical because this is not a country that should be doing that. We are known for people coming to America's shores for opportunity. But if you really want to talk about immigration, the dialogue is not complete unless you talk about legal immigration reform. And so I think that finding an immigrant rights organization and saying, you know what, there are children who are whose parents are from India who are waiting for their green card for 15, 20. I mean, John Oliver, one of my favorite shows that I do watch. When I do watch TV, I like to get some laughs.
Mm-hmm.
Life as a legislator can be quite stressful. But the thing is that John Oliver did this really amazing episode on legal immigration reform. And so having that as an issue and understanding that as an issue, getting involved in that, or finding, I don't know, like, find your professional organization. I'm sure in your profession, there are membership organizations. I have the Michigan State Medical Society president-elect come to my office and sit down and talk about the things that MS is interested in and what are the issues that they care about. And so we had a bill. Again, I met with him. I could see the flaws in the bill based on what he told me. But guess what? I voted for the bill because we needed a starting point. But guess what? I want to keep that door open so that we can make changes to that bill and add additional amendments to that bill so that we can improve it. Because no law is ever 100%. Like, humans are fallible. So law is also going to be created by humans. It's not going to be perfect. So being able to keep the door open with all the stakeholders so that this is what they call making the sausage, right? Getting all the different stakeholders. We actually had a bill, one of my Republican colleagues and I had a bill that we wanted to allow for electric vehicle charging stations to be put at shopping malls and places so that, you could pay for it there. Like, let's say you went into the mall, that you would have charging stations and you put your credit card in and your car got charged, right? And so making sure that we could work with all the different stakeholders, the people who are charging, the regulations around it. How are you charging? Are you charging by hour? Or, is it how much juice your car is able to get? And, so just, and making sure that the retailers that are going to be hosting these, like making sure all those different stakeholders involved are in agreement on that bill. Mm-hmm. Or that package of bills. And we had a big meeting one day. And so we really need to do that with all the bills, is making sure that all stakeholders are in agreement. And so knowing who they are is important.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So some questions that I had for you on, advice that you would give for just like young people in general looking into, venturing into the field of public service. and also kind of people who might just want to, go into leadership positions and things like that. And what are the most important qualities that you see in like a good leader, be it in the public service field or just in general?
Sure. I would say first thing is if you want to get involved in a political office, find out where your state rep, state senator, some local elected official, or even a congressperson. I think starting local is even better. So go volunteer in your local city. Find out what your local city government does. And you'll be fascinated by what a city has to do to support its community. Start, whatever, like I think my son volunteered in the legal office, in the attorney's office in the city for a semester when he was in high school. So he got a sense of what they do. And I don't know that he really liked it actually, because they had to go write rules about drones. He had to do all this research on drones for them. And so you might be given a research project. Volunteer either in your local office of your elected official or in their actual wherever they meet. So if you have an opportunity to go to wherever, since you're in Austin, you should, Texas capital is Austin, go volunteer, find out how you get in, ask your friends. Even if you're an engineering major, I like people of all majors to come in and learn how government works.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, and this is a lot easier because you can do this in the summer when you're home, go volunteer in a local campaign. Find out who the candidates are, find out what they're representing and what their stand is on issues. Pick the one that you like. Like if you like what they do, ask them. And so go say, I want to volunteer in your office, and maybe you'll get hired, right? Like you usually, you have to volunteer somewhere before they know who you are and what you do, and then they'll hire you. So I actually have a young man who's about to go to college at MSU, who just graduated high school, who started volunteering, and this month we're hiring him on as an intern.
Wow.
And so July we started him as a paid intern, not a high, but just like a stipend. And so those are things that different offices will do. And so I think that's something to do. And as again, find a local club, that you want to be part of and join it, and professional organizations so that you can find out what are the issues that once you graduate college and get into your profession. I know that my daughter is involved with an organization on particular healthcare issues and they advocate on those. And obviously race relations, getting involved in organizations related to addressing systemic inequities. The African American community in America is facing so many problems, whether it's oppression in terms of education, quality of education they get. When a child doesn't get educated, they don't have a strong future, right? So making sure that African American children have education and making sure that they have the resources they need. Right now, one of the biggest challenges is with this online learning, and it's not just African American, it's rural children too. We don't have people to teach online. Where are those kids going to go if they don't have broadband at home? How are they going to learn remotely? And so making sure, maybe you want to find out about what is the situation in your state and how do you enact that? How do you help support statewide broadband? There might be, you're a technology guy. So, imagine if you could live anywhere in the state of Texas. If you had broadband, it would open up the possibilities. In fact, you could come live in Michigan, work for a company in Texas, right? If you had statewide broadband here. So I think this is something to really think about. Like, find out the issue that makes you excited and pursue that as you want to change something. If everybody took that little bit of effort, we wouldn't have so much money in politics.
Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, that was great advice. So basically, what I understood is kind of just go ahead and find out what you're interested in and basically join an organization or something like that where you can get involved with talking to people and having communication and stuff.
Right.
Got it. That makes sense. One last kind of question that I had for you. Not really a kind of politics related question, but more of kind of your experience related to your experience of growing up, as an Indian American. And something that is very prevalent in our community is that, you know, a lot of young kids, they're often told by their parents to pick engineering versus medicine, and I'm pretty sure like this was in your case too. But like oftentimes, the only options that they're provided are these two. And I just wanted to kind of get your opinion on, you know, how like the importance of kind of branching out, and kind of like just wanted to know, is that the reason why that's why we don't see a lot of Indians running for office in these elected positions? And you know, what can kind of we do to spread awareness
Sure.
of this? Yeah.
So I'll say, as a mom, I'm always worried about my child's future. And so if they go into a profession that I have no way of knowing if they're going to be able to succeed, I think that's one of the reasons that we don't see parents encouraging their children to go into professions that they're not familiar with. It's always fear of the unknown, right?
Mhm.
And we want you to have a secure future. As a parent, I want my children to have a secure future. Um, so that's one reason, I think. The second reason is, and I think that we don't always know how politics works, whether it's an immigrant from India or from anywhere else. We're familiar with how politics worked in the old country. And so maybe we didn't like the politics of the old country. And so we don't want our children to become involved in politics here because it's probably considered to be similar, right? The corruption, whatever it is. And so I think that's another reason. And I will tell you the third most important reason now that I'm in it. So every 2 years, I have to run for reelection.
Mm-hmm.
I have to apply for my job all over again every single time, which really means that the day that I won my election, I have to start working to apply for it again in 2 years, the day after I win. So you're always in this constant mode of running for and trying to get a new job just as you got it. So it's very stressful, especially running in a district that doesn't necessarily vote for a Democrat and isn't, you know, I think it's harder. Maybe if you're in a Democratic district, it's fine, but I don't think that that's going to make the strongest society, right? Because it's when diverse people come together that and share common ground. This is what I was doing before, right? So if everybody in a club thinks the same, does the club get any better?
No.
No. Right. And so I think it's really important that we work with people who are different to find that common ground. And I think that's one of the reasons that running for office can be very stressful, because you got to do your job.
Mm-hmm.
And you also have to run for office, right? So really I signed up for 2 jobs. And so I always tell people, find out about policy, like become interested in area of policy. Maybe find out about broadband in the state of Texas. Why don't you have broadband? And get involved in something like that. And then become a policy expert. And going to law school, right? There are people now from the Indian community that I know that have gone to law school and then run for office. But there are also businessmen. And I think that's important that we have a wide variety of experience that we bring to the table as legislators. I have a very good friend from the city of Warren in the neighboring district who is a teacher. And so she initially went to school for public policy. And then she realized, you know what, I don't know what I want to do. And she learned about policy, but then she went back to school, got a teaching certification, was a teacher in a local school district. And then after working in that, she then became interested in running for office and fighting for public education and making sure. So she and I, even though we come at it from completely different angles, she doesn't have kids, but she had so many kids in her classroom. So she really appreciates the importance of educating children. What are the challenges that a teacher faces in a classroom? And what are the challenges parents face when they send their children to school?
Makes sense. So, so that's actually really great news that a lot of like people from our community are slowly like going into politics in a lot of different fields of work. And I think that's very good for increasing our representation in this country too. And finally, one last question I had for you, that was kind of like I usually like to end all like interviews with this question. If, what is one advice that you just to like throw out to just say like young people in general? You'd be like, if you wanted to say, hey, young people, I want to tell you this, what would that one thing be?
Volunteer.
Um,
Volunteer in something besides, you know, what you're expected to volunteer in a way that you help somebody else. Right? I mean, I think a lot of times we volunteer so that I see a lot of especially immigrant kids volunteering in the hospital because they want to go to med school.
mhm.
Volunteer in an arena where you're helping maybe somebody who's not as strong in education, be a tutor, not just for money, but like to help somebody. Learn about those who are struggling and what maybe you can help them with. But doing that will really help you understand where the gaps are in society and being able to help with that.
Makes sense. I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking time out of your day and again, sharing your wisdom on the podcast. And I'm sure a lot of people will find the information that you gave very helpful.
Thank you so much for having me, Aditya. It was very nice to be here.